Paul the Apostle to his young friend Timothy in his first letter, 4th chapter, train yourself for religion. Physical exercise is useful enough, but the usefulness of religion is unlimited since it holds out promise both for life here and now and for the life to come. That is a saying you can rely on, and no one should doubt it. I mean that the point of all our discipline and struggle and battling is that we have put our trust in the living God, and He is the Savior of the whole human race, particularly all those who believe. A friend left a book on my desk recently entitled Jesus in Beijing. It's an account of the growth of Christianity in modern China, estimates as high as 80-90 million, by David Aikman, former Beijing bureau chief for Time magazine. The book begins this way. The 18 American tourists visiting China weren't expecting much from the evening's scheduled lecture. They were already exhausted from a day of touring, but what the speaker had to say astonished them. One of the things that we've been researching, he said, was what accounted for the success, in fact, the preeminence of the West. We studied everything we could from the historical, political, economic, cultural perspective. At first we thought it was because you had better munitions than we had. Then we thought it was because you had the best political system. Next we focused on your economic system. But in the past 20 years or so, we've realized that the heart of your culture is your religion. That is why the West has been so powerful. The Christian foundation of social and cultural life, we think, was what made possible the emergence of capitalism and then the successful transition to democratic politics. We really don't have any doubt about this. And this was not from some ultra-conservative from a think tank in Orange County, California, or from Jerry Falwell's Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. This was a scholar from one of China's premier academic research institutes, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. And a week ago, one of you handed me an article from the New York Times, from whom all truth flows. An article about research by Harvard professors Rachel McCleary and Robert Barrow, which concludes that religion affects economic outcomes mainly by fostering religious beliefs that influence individual traits such as honesty, work ethic, thrift, openness to strangers, and by creating perceived rewards and punishments that relate to good and bad lifetime behavior. Political scientist at the University of Michigan, Ronald Engelhardt, comments on the study, I find that belief factors play a major role in economic growth. But here is one of the world's leading economists who also says that is the case. It's obvious that many cultures and places around the world do not enjoy what we do. That's obvious. Poverty, beyond anything we know, even in pockets of deprivation within our borders, is the more common human condition. Jesus himself said, the poor you have with you always. And we need, and we ought to be concerned, because we're not unaffected, even from a self-interest standpoint, when hundreds of millions look over the fence and see our privileged way of life. And it is that. But poverty is and always has been the more universal human situation. So perhaps the more interesting question is, why in certain countries has such wealth arisen? It may well be, at least in part, because of a particular kind of religious culture which creates a particular kind of individual character. Now there's danger here. If it's true that our economic success, our standard of living, is in some part the result of our religious heritage, it is a heritage bequeathed to us from the biblical faith through our parents and grandparents, our ancestors, and there's no ground for self-congratulation in this particular discovery. Indeed, if the financial means, the comforts, the conveniences, the medicine, everything we enjoy are the results of attitudes and values bred into us by our past, we might better ask whether these attitudes and values are holding up in us in our time. whether we still undergo the discipline and respect the values which made it all possible in the first place. But it does seem in some measure true that the life we enjoy does go all the way back to the old biblical story, to somebody like the Apostle Paul, rediscovered by a Luther and a Calvin, which insisted that every human being has a calling from God. Not just the cardinal and the monk, but the peasant and the shopkeeper are called to labor and to produce beyond the immediate needs of self and family, produce for the common good. The product of the Reformation was a people motivated to earn and save and give. In fact, that was the motto of John Wesley, another product of this culture. He exhorted his people to earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. He was heard to comment once that the problem with his people was they could only count to 2. When you can develop a people convinced that God has work for everyone, and a people that finds real meaning in labor, hard labor, you have the basis for a thriving society. W.E.B. Du Bois caught this view of life when he wrote, "The return from your work must be the satisfaction that the work brings you and the world's need of that work. And with this, life is heaven, or as near heaven as you can get. The moral mission of business," he goes on, "is to exercise all the imagination and energy and initiative it can muster for the purpose of producing goods, services, and occasions for human achievement which make the world around us better." This means, of course, a society that bends every effort to provide everyone with an opportunity to contribute. And it means the maintenance of a real work ethic among us. When we speak of ethic here, we're underlining the fact that it is a moral obligation laid upon all of us to contribute. I think most of us, a bit older, grew up under the influence of this ethic. I know I did. Ever feel guilty about doing nothing? You got it. The work ethic. Now, of course, it can be obsessive to the point of idolatry, and narrow and one-sided. And it's dangerous where we equate our work with our worth. There are other goals to which we are also called, other than just our work. But Paul's picture of the life of faith as a life of strenuous activity, of discipline on behalf of meaningful goals, including, interestingly, the good life here, is what the work ethic's all about. And when we speak of ethic, we also point to the reality that such an attitude toward our labor must be grounded in disciplines associated with moral integrity. The ambitions which thrive in a market economy must function within the framework of strong moral codes and values, or they easily run aground in greed and dishonesty that is destructive of the market economy. Someone has said, that the problem with communism was the communist system. It didn't work. The problem with capitalism is some of the capitalists who don't work with integrity. And we've had some examples recently of that loss of character, have we not? Whether we are less moral than preceding generations is difficult to quantify. I'm not sure I was any better as an adolescent than some of the adolescents around here today. One thing I think we can say, though, is that we have lost a sense of the absolutes that we are supposed to live by, and we violate them at our peril. In many ways, we've lost the courage of convictions that former generations possessed, at least that my parents possessed. I observe young parents today who are conscientious and loving, who nevertheless seem unsure of themselves and their right to command and demand and utilize their authority. A teacher by the name of Nancy Harvey writes, a while back while standing in a grocery checkout line, I saw a 5-year-old climb up inside a frozen food case, not too far from the checkout, to reach a treat on the top shelf. You learn a lot in checkout lines, I've discovered. The mother, a well-dressed, obviously well-educated woman, was trying gently to coax the girl back to the checkout line But when the child continued to climb up inside the case, the mother said nothing, and she paid for the treat, which was obviously coming her way. A child who can ignore requests or commands without consequences, who takes what she likes and does whatever she pleases, is not going to adapt very well to the school or the larger world, which will never be attractive enough to offset the unpleasantness of submitting to duty and authority and routine. Behind what they call in school today responsibility skills does lie the need for self-discipline. And learning the discipline of self is always painful. And this is a truth that I think our society tends to ignore. Everything from diet pills to Willow Creek testifies to our desire to avoid the discomfort, considering how we spend thousands of dollars trying to lose weight without exercise, and how we try to depict church as an amusing place to be, so that the people presumably won't be too upset if we mention the possibility of denying themselves. It's not surprising that we will also try to cajole our children into discipline by making it seem somehow fun. And certainly in vast reaches of the academic world, the idea that there are moral absolutes which lay their demands upon us is dismissed out of hand. One professor tells of attempting to alert his students to the possibility that there may be some absolutes out there, ask whether they were at least willing to say that Hitler was immoral, wrong, only to discover in surveying the class that most of them really weren't ready to make that judgment. They thought they should know more about the social and cultural situation that led to his attitudes and actions. Another professor tells of a discussion on ethics in a class at Duke University. And a student proceeds, he says, to lecture the class. Well, we are learning that there is a certain genetic disposition to certain kinds of adaptively beneficial behavior. Lovely language. Adaptively beneficial behavior, and what you call ethics, is simply that sum of behavior that has been genetically programmed into the human race. And the professor writes somewhat later, I thought it sad that on some spring night in the Duke Gardens, a young man might look into the eyes of a young woman and say sweetly, I have a genetic propensity for you, and feel that our mating would strengthen the gene pool of the race. So the product of our economic and social system seems in large measure to be grounded in our respect for, if you will, something like the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not lie, steal, cheat. The creativity and contributions of our life together does depend upon the reign of moral integrity among us. And finally, our moral integrity as individuals and as a people is grounded in our, forgive the word, piety, which is to say, in the habits and practices of our religion, which is to say, our relationship with God. Productivity, creativity requires integrity, and integrity is sustained by our relationship to our Maker. Now, in one sense, relationship with God, especially as Christians, we believe through Jesus, is a gracious gift. We certainly do not earn it or deserve it, but from another perspective, it cannot take on power and reality in our lives unless, however haltingly and imperfectly, we manage to sustain certain habits and disciplines. Let me use the analogy of marriage, because that's an analogy that the Scriptures turns to again and again to illuminate our relationship to God. Marriage is a gift, is it not, given by two people to one another in a place like this, or like Second Baptist Church in Evanston, where John Robert Fraser and Jacqueline Starks yesterday gave a lovely gift to one another in front of all of us. Those of you who've been here a while know who I'm talking about. It is a gift, and we need to remember that. If it's not a commitment freely given, it's fraudulent at the very outset. But implied in that gift are a number of activities, habits, practices, like talk to me, husband. It's so obvious we often overlook it. Relationship means what? It means time together for one another, does it not? It means shutting down our activities and our mental preoccupation with our labors. It means even maybe turning off the television. It means sitting and listening and responding and enjoying one another's presence. Isn't that relationship? Now, religion from the human side involves these very same things, these same activities and habits and practices, if relationship with God is to take on reality for us, shaping and correcting our conscience from time to time, recovering and reconciling after failure, offering strength and courage and hope and motivation for tomorrow. We do seem to have designed a world in which such relationship is exceedingly difficult. C.S. Lewis, some of you know of, he's written a little volume called Screwtape Letters. I go back to it from time to time. These are letters from Screwtape, who was sort of a head devil to his little henchman Wormwood, who's been assigned one specific victim, instructing him how to lead him astray. And the one point he makes is, you don't put flagrant temptations in front of him. You do such things as tell him to avoid silence. It's not good for you. Avoid any train of thought that might lead you off the beaten path of tomorrow's job. Teach him to concentrate on money and sex and status and health, and above all on his own grievances. And by all means tell him to keep the radio and the television on, and stay with the crowd, and use plenty of sedation. And tell him if he must read books, to be very careful about books. You'd be safer to stick to newspapers and magazines, especially because the advertisements are very helpful. All of his space and time, if you can manage it, should be occupied with noise. The great dynamism, the audible expressions of all that is ruthless and virile. In fact, Wormwood one day will make the whole universe one immense noise. Train yourself for religion. Physical exercise is useful. He says that. That's why Marlene and I try to get over to the fitness center early each morning. Everybody there? Well, not everybody is there. But what are they doing? They're trying to get ready, are they not, for the day? But says Paul, there's another way to get ready. There is a spiritual aerobics. Why is it's so much easier to spend a half hour exercising one's body than to spend 15 minutes before God? At least so I find it. But, says the apostle, the usefulness of religion is unlimited, since it holds out promise of life here and now and life to come. God offers himself to us in the time and thought and reflection and conversation, all the quiet disciplines that we bring to the relationship. I've always admired the late Senator Paul Tsongas for the honesty of his journey toward God in the years he battled cancer. Native of Lowell, Massachusetts, a graduate of Dartmouth College and Yale Law School, 1974 he was elected to Congress, and then in 1978 to the Senate. At the age of 42, planning his campaign for a second term in the Senate, he contracted lymphoma. And it was to change not only his attitude toward his calling in life, requiring a change of vocation, but also the discipline and routine and the pieties by which he began to live. He writes a remarkable statement. Let me read it. The illness made me face up to the fact that I will die someday. It made me think about wanting to look back without regret. It made me appreciate Nikki, my wife's strength, as I'd never quite done before. I'm blessed with a marriage that provides immense meaning. I could now look at my wife and see her in a way that I do not in the rush of everyday life. The lymphoma caused me to realize the preciousness of the moments of a child's development. I would have spent too much time away from my daughters had I continued that career. The attention and power would have been seductive, and I would have enjoyed the former, and I hope would have used the latter for some good purpose, but I would not have helped Ashley on her science project, or accompanied Katina on her Brownie weekend camping trip, or had Molly fall asleep in my arms in the hammock. So I see life as a search for balance. We all have to bring the scales back to the center. And finally, my illness has forced me to understand that I have true spiritual needs, whether I'm healthy or unhealthy. I find it hard to write about this, but I do find I must attend church services and spend time in quiet and prayer in order to renew and refresh my sense of the presence of God. God was always there for me, but in a rather removed way. Now the entire matter of faith is central to me and gives me a truer sense of direction. The road is a long one, I know, but I intend to stay on it. These changes, or more accurately reinforcements, are a precious gift, and I treasure them. And I will curse myself if ever I begin to forget. All this, I trust, has made me a better person. Ironically, it would have made me a better senator, but it doesn't really matter. My political career now seems quite irrelevant. As an ordinary citizen, I can partake of the joys and responsibilities of family and give thanks to God. So far, I'm off to a good start. I even notice now if the sky is blue, I see that God has given us flowers and rivers and sunshine. I realize that life is quite wondrous in its natural and human dimensions. Oh, there's darkness as well. Every morning I know the fragility of life, and I'm aware of my mortality. Every day something hurts somewhere, so I can never forget. New fears, new hobgoblins that I have to come to grips with. But in truth, my great worry now is that I will lose my current sense of values and perspective and relationship to my God. I pray not. I want always to feel as I do now. I'm here, I'm alive. I share the blessings of God with those around me. I've learned that those blessings must be truly appreciated if they're to have meaning. Let me, dear Lord, spend my life filled with the capacity to see what is before me and to be fulfilled in that sight. Unquote. Train yourself for religion. Its usefulness is unlimited, since it holds out promise for both life here and now and for the life to come. On that you can rely. I mean that the point of all our toiling and struggle is our trust in God.